He placed the veil on my head, then turned to place a second on hers. She smiled at me, in the same wedding robes, and I smiled back as I stirred the poison into their tea. They thought I was the obedient bride, but I was the storm they'd raised in silence. They say the scent of jasmine soothes the nerves, but I used it to cover the bitterness. Not in me, in the cup. The banquet hall shimmered with golden silk and red lacquered screens. 2 thrones. 2 brides. He stood between us, the Honorable Lord Chiron, son of the High Minister, commander of the West Court, pride of the Kai bloodline. And we were his trophies. His first wife and his gentle cousin, now tied to him by red thread and public scandal dressed as ceremony. A rare mercy, they whispered, to wed the sick cousin alongside the chosen bride. So compassionate. So noble. Noble. A word men use when they carve you open and expect you to thank them for the shape they made. I was Lady Yu Xiangjuan, daughter of the Yu house. Silent. Useful. Convenient. And no one ever asked what I wanted. Not my father, who handed me off like polished livestock. Not the Empress's envoy, who read my name from a scroll and nodded without meeting my eyes. Not even Lord Chiron, who sent silk and hairpins months before he sent himself. He never even told me there would be 2 veils. She's delicate, he said, when I saw her for the first time that morning. Fian needs protection. And you're strong enough to understand. And I did understand. I understood perfectly. He needed me as the face. The name. She was the one he wanted behind closed doors. He married me for power. Hurt for pleasure. They stood beside me as the incense was lit. Fian coughed into a golden sleeve, such a pretty sound. He looked at her, not me. So I poured the tea. Sweetened with honey. Laced with patience. Measured by weeks. I drank mine with an antidote slipped into the lining of my sleeve. They drank theirs with trust. I had been collecting the poison in drops. 1 brush at a time. 1 flower petal at a time. Not enough to kill. Not yet. But enough to break her voice. Enough to hollow his chest. Enough to make them need me. I wasn't trying to kill them that night. I was trying to make them live. Long enough to know they were falling. The wedding guests didn't notice. They clapped and toasted and praised the Emperor's mercy for blessing Lord Chiron with 2 wives. What good fortune. They didn't see my fingers tremble beneath the silk sleeve. Not with fear, but with restraint. I had wanted to add more. But mercy has a sharper edge when it's served in pieces. Fian looked so beautiful that day. Hair pinned with white orchids. A silver blush on her cheeks. She leaned toward me after the 3rd toast and whispered, "Sister, how lucky I am to share your day." I wanted to ask her what it felt like. To wear the veil of a girl you replaced. To drink from the same cup she had already bled into. But I just smiled and touched her wrist. "Yes," I said. "You'll remember this day, every time your heart stutters." After the banquet, they both began to change. Lord Chiron's appetite thinned. Fian's voice grew hoarse. Doctors were called. Charms were hung. But the servants still bowed to them, and ignored me. They still told me to wait quietly for his summons. Still gave me cold soup and shadowed chambers. They didn't know I wasn't waiting. I was watching, measuring, preparing. Each day, I wrote their symptoms in ink. Each week, I brewed a different blend. Each smile was timed, never too kind, never too cold. They thought I was enduring. I was counting. "You look pale, Lady Yu," the physician told me once. "Are you well?" I nodded. Because it's easy to be well when you've already swallowed every bitter root. I watched Fian cough into lace. Watched Lord Chiron press his temples and groan under candlelight. And I smiled with the quiet of a woman who'd learned that silence was deadlier than a sword. They say a woman's power lies in her ability to endure. But I never believed in endurance. I believed in memory. And memory, unlike love, does not forgive. The first time Fian collapsed, it was in the courtyard. She had been feeding koi fish with rose petals, a habit I taught her. She smiled sweetly at the servants, waved at the guards, and then folded like silk. Lord Chiron carried her in his arms like a child. her head resting against his chest, her hand curled around his collar. He didn't call for me. He never did. But I stood at the window and watched. Because she collapsed in the same place I once sat alone, on the day he first ignored me. I remembered that silence. So I laced it into her breath. By the second month, her cough had worsened. She no longer wore rouge. Could no longer sing. She wept in private, I know, because the maids whispered louder than they realized. It must be grief, they said. She's too gentle for palace life. I offered her soup. She drank it.
She always did.
That's the thing about kindness. Once you offer it with the right tone, they never question the spoon. One evening he called for me. The first time since the wedding. I found him in the eastern hall, seated alone beside a half-burnt incense coil. He looked thinner, less proud. His eyes didn't meet mine. Fian is very ill, he said. I said nothing. You've always been good, he added, almost to himself. Always obedient. I nodded. Because that's what he needed me to be, obedient enough to pity. Stay by her side, he murmured. She trusts you. And she should. I made her sickness soft, elegant, lingering. Like love, it stayed even when unwanted. That night, I sat beside her bed. She was curled beneath layers of brocade, lips pale, breath shallow. She reached for my hand. I don't understand, she whispered. Why is this happening? Her eyes searched mine. So fragile.
So wide.
So foolish. And for a moment I almost pitied her. But then I remembered. The wedding veil. The way she smiled when he chose her chamber over mine. The way she laughed behind fans when I walked past like a ghost in my own home. So I brushed her hair back and said, It's the air, sister. This house is heavy with old incense. And she nodded, even as her heartbeat trembled. They say vengeance is poison, but they never say how quiet it can be, how it grows beneath fingernails and behind the eyes, how it smiles. By the third month I became visible again. The servants bowed deeper. The physicians asked my opinion. Even the steward brought reports to me, quietly, politely, like I had always been there. Because I had. I never left. I was always watching. One morning, I entered the southern gardens and found Lord Chiron sitting beneath the plum blossoms. Alone. His hair uncombed. His robe undone. He looked at me, not as a husband, but as a man who had married one woman and discovered the wrong one was stronger. She isn't improving, he said quietly. No, I replied. She won't. He blinked, like he had finally seen me. But I didn't smile. Not this time. When she finally coughed blood, it was not dramatic. There was no screaming, no fainting, just a single red line on her sleeve, a delicate choke, and the slow realization that her body no longer belonged to her. I wiped her mouth gently. You'll be all right, I whispered. He'll take care of you. And I kissed her forehead like a sister. Because even monsters deserve a lullaby. That night, I went to my own chamber, lit a single candle, and wrote a letter to my mother, though she had been dead for years. They made me invisible. So, I became the wind in their lungs. They made me silent. So, I taught my silence how to kill. I don't know if I will kill them.
Not yet.
Because suffering, when stretched like silk, becomes art. And I am an artist now. I no longer wear white. I wear crimson. For vows broken. For names erased. For poisons sweetened with memory. Let them drink. Let them smile. Let them rot. Softly. Poison does not always kill. Sometimes it teaches. It teaches the breath to shorten. The bones to ache. The throat to forget how to sing. It teaches men to look at the woman they ignored and see a blade behind her eyes. Fian stopped eating the rice porridge by the end of the third moon.
Too bland, she said. Too heavy.
She asked for plums. I brought her dried ones, soaked in syrup, sweetened with dried chrysanthemum petals. She ate them with a smile and cried afterward. Everything tastes strange, she whispered. Even sweetness burns. I kissed her fingers. It must be the weather, I told her. Spring never enters this house easily. She nodded, because she had never learned how to doubt a woman who serves with her own hands. Lord Chiron visited her more often now, not out of love, out of guilt. It clung to his robes like smoke. He lit incense he never used before. He prayed aloud, not to the heavens, but to his ancestors, asking why his gentle cousin was cursed with such fragile blood. But he never asked me. He didn't need to. He had already seen it.
In the tea.
In the glances. In the way I passed Fian bowls with my left hand, the same hand that never trembled. He didn't know whether to fear me, so he tried to pity me instead. "You've been kind, Xiangjuan," he told me one night. "Too kind, perhaps." I looked up at him over my embroidery hoop. "Am I? I never gave you what you deserved." I set the needle down. "No," I said softly. "You gave me exactly what I needed." He didn't speak again for a long time, but I saw his fingers twitch, as if reaching for something already slipping away. Fian began to lose her hair. At first, just strands on her pillow, then whole clumps wrapped around the comb like grief. She sobbed into her sleeves, begging the physicians to tell her it was seasonal.
They didn't know what to say, so they called in a temple priest.
He drew charms, burned herbs, tied silk threads around her wrists. But even the sacred cannot stop what has already been swallowed. She stopped leaving her chambers. The light made her head ache. The noise made her flinch. She clung to Lord Chiron's sleeve like a child. And he let her, because guilt, when it festers, begins to look like affection. But it was rot, and rot spreads. The steward came to me privately. "Lady Yu," he bowed. "There is confusion in the household. The second wife is ill, but you remain." I smiled. "Should I not?"
"You're calm," he said.
"While she coughs blood. Would panic make her better?" He didn't know how to answer, because they expected the first wife to wither, to crumble in the shadow of the second. But I grew, rooted in silence, fed by poison, blooming in the absence of love. The first wife is meant to be ornamental, decorative, controlled, but I had turned into something else. Necessary. They began asking me to approve the kitchen lists, to sign off on servant schedules, to manage the visits from other noble houses who came to inquire about Lady Fian's recovery. "You are always more suited to this," the steward said. He meant it as praise. But I knew what he was truly saying. "She is falling apart. You are not." Lord Chiron's mother visited once. Lady Su Min, the original iron flower of the Kai house. Sharp eyes, thin lips, an ancestral jade pin always stuck through her bun. She stood in the middle of my chamber, without sitting. "Do not mistake illness for victory," she said coldly. "Your duty is to maintain harmony, not to bury your co-wife in shadows." I bowed. But when I looked up, I held her gaze too long. And for the first time, I saw her falter. Just for a moment. "Harmony," I said softly, "is best kept when no one hears the second voice." Fian broke in the 4th month. It didn't happen like a storm. It happened like silk unraveling at the hem. One thread, then another, until there was nothing left to stitch back together. She began to see things, hear footsteps that weren't there, mutter under her breath to spirits only she could name. One night, she begged the maid to remove all the mirrors from her chamber. "She's in them," Fian cried. "The one with my face. She's smiling when I cry." They took the mirrors, but the face remained.
Mine.
Lord Chiron called me to her bedside. He didn't kneel like a husband. He sat like a man drowning. "Help her," he said. "I know you can." I poured tea. The same blend I had used before, but gentler now. Only enough to cloud the edges of her mind. "She trusts you," he added. "You're the only one who doesn't scare her." I nodded, because it is a strange thing to become the comfort of the one you're destroying. She looked at me like a child, eyes wide, lips trembling. "You won't leave me, will you?" I tucked the blanket around her. "No," I whispered. "I'll stay until the end." She smiled, and for a moment I almost wondered what she might have been if we had met before love ruined us both. But cruelty doesn't ask for understanding. It simply finishes what was begun. That same week, I was invited to sit in the ancestral hall. A small gesture, but in the eyes of the household, it was everything. Fionn's seat remained empty. No one asked why. I lit the incense with a steady hand, knelt before the altar in red robes lined with silver thread. And when I bowed, I felt nothing. Not guilt, not triumph, just silence. The silence of knowing they had chosen me second, and now could not move without me. Lord Chiron started to avoid my gaze. He still came to me with questions, still relied on my calm when the physicians argued and the servants panicked. But he no longer met my eyes when I answered. He began to see what I had become. Not the soft-spoken bride he believed would fade beside a prettier flame, but the fire that stayed burning when the house turned to ash. One evening, as the moon rose silver over the garden walls, he caught me alone. I had been cutting flowers, white peonies, their petals curled like secrets. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. I turned to him slowly. "Why would I? I destroyed your wedding day." "No," I said. "You gave me a stage." He flinched, but he didn't deny it. In the 5th month, Fionn stopped recognizing people. She called the maids by wrong names, mistook Lord Chiron for her brother. Once, she asked me if I was her mother, and I said yes, because why not? I had birthed the silence she now lived in. The doctors declared her condition spirit-rooted, a madness from within. Lord Chiron wept. He said he would send her to a temple retreat for healing, for peace. But we both knew it was exile. She would not return. He asked if I would accompany her. "She trusts you," he repeated. "She needs you." And I smiled for the first time in front of him. "Then you go.
Take her.
Nurse her. Hold the woman you broke your vows for until she forgets your name, too." He didn't answer, but his shoulders dropped. Not with relief, with defeat. That night, he did not sleep in either of our chambers. He wandered the southern courtyard, where Fionn had once collapsed, where I had once stood, watching. And now the balance shifted. Fionn, once called the blessed bride, was forgotten. I, once shadowed, now stood at the center of the house. Not because I begged, not because I fought, but because I endured longer than their illusions. I walked past the mirror that morning and looked at my reflection. My eyes were sharper, my face calmer. There was no rage left in me, only memory. And memory, I've learned, does not rot like love. It crystallizes. They brought me new robes, red, trimmed with gold. They said it was custom, that the first wife must now greet the noble visitors. And I did. I poured their tea. I accepted their blessings. I listened to their condolences about Fionn's decline. And all the while I smiled, because they had no idea. It was me who had steeped the sweetness that burned her throat. They sent her away at dawn. No procession, no fanfare, just a carriage with closed shutters and a prayer tied to the door. Fionn wore no rouge, no jewels, only a veil over her eyes, as if blindness could hide her shame. She didn't speak when they lifted her into the cart.
She didn't look at me.
But I did not look away, because I wanted her to remember the last face she saw before she left everything behind. Was mine. Lord Chiron stood beside the carriage like a statue carved in grief, one hand clenched, the other hanging useless at his side. "She'll be cared for," he said softly. "The temple is peaceful." I tilted my head. Is that where peace lives now? He didn't reply. He couldn't, because he knew what I knew, that what had been taken from me was not just my wedding. It was my name, my place, my breath, my voice. And now, I was taking it back. The household changed once she was gone. Not suddenly, not loudly, but like wind changing directions. You don't see it, but the lanterns begin to sway. The steward bowed lower. The cooks waited for my word before preparing his meals. The servants began to call me Madame You again, without being told. Not first wife, not lady of the East Wing, but my name. the one they used to lower when spoken, now sharpened in every mouth. Lord Chiron rarely looked at me. He left before sunrise, returned long after the oil lamps had been lit. Once, I found a wine cup shattered in his study, and beside it, one of the hairpins I'd returned after the wedding night. The one he gifted me before giving her the chamber. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. Some ruins are best left unburied. By the second week, I controlled the entire household. The storage ledgers, the servant wages, the guest registry. Not because I demanded it, but because no one else could. She holds the house together. I overheard one guard say, "Without her, the walls would speak too loudly."
They were right. The walls do speak.
And they remember everything. I took walks in the southern gardens now, the same ones Fian had claimed as her own. Each petal whispered stories I'd once swallowed like rice. Every koi in the pond shimmered under sunlight that used to land only on her sleeve. I stood still, felt the wind against my cheek, and said my name aloud.
Once. Softly.
Yu Xiangjuan. It no longer trembled. I began to write again. At night. Alone. Letters I never sent. To a mother long buried. To a version of myself I had left bleeding in the bridal hall. They stole my silence and called it virtue. They carved my name out of memory and gave it to another. But I remembered. And now so will they. The court began to whisper about Lady Fian's disappearance. And with those whispers came visitors. Women with long sleeves and sharper tongues. Wives of ministers. Daughters of generals. They wanted to see the wife who endured. The girl who smiled while her husband married another beside her. The woman who now ruled the house of Kai without lifting her voice. I served them tea, flavored with plum blossom and grace. And they left speaking my name with soft respect and quiet fear. One of them returned twice. Lady Onli, daughter of the war minister. She wore black jade and never smiled. "You do not weep for what was taken from you," she said.
No.
Then what do you wait for? I met her gaze. The moment they asked me to speak and regret it, she nodded once. And for the first time,
I had an ally. It wasn't just the house that changed.
It was the city, the court,
the air.
They began to speak my name in the tea houses, in the embroidery guilds, even behind palace fans. She poured the poison with a smile. No one proved it, but everyone knows. She stayed. She rose. And now the Kai house breathes at her pace. The men didn't know what to do with me. The women knew exactly what I was. Not a wife. Not a widow. Not a victim. A survivor who never cried on cue. Lord Chiron became colder.
Not toward me.
Toward himself. His speeches in court lost their strength. His papers came back with corrections. He drank more wine than broth. He avoided banquets. Feared mirrors. Because every time he looked too long, he saw a version of himself that had bowed before weakness and lost to a woman he underestimated. The Empress sent an invitation. A formal banquet. 4 noble wives to present seasonal blessings. I had not been invited in years. Not when Fian still glittered beside him.
But now.
Now they wanted to see what kind of woman survives a wedding meant to erase her. I dressed slowly that morning. Not in red, but violet, the color of twilight, of balance between power and sorrow. My hair was pinned with silver combs. No jewels. Just one hairpin. The one Lord Chiron left shattered. I had it reforged. Now it held my name. The great hall shimmered with silk and gold. Women in phoenix patterns and dragon-threaded hems. They looked at me like I was a story. I let them. Because I was. A myth they could touch. A warning they would whisper. The Empress asked how I kept my composure during hardship. I poured her tea myself. When a storm tries to drown you, I said, you learn to breathe where others choke. She didn't smile, but she nodded. And that was enough. Later that night, as the carriages left and the lamps dimmed, I walked the outer garden alone. But I wasn't alone. He stood near the plum trees, cloaked in black, face turned. I recognized him from earlier. Not one of the ministers. Not a noble son. A military man. One of the emperor's northern commanders. He had watched me from the shadows during the banquet, not with lust, not with pity, but with understanding. As if he, too, had buried himself once. You didn't drink, I said aloud. He turned slightly, just enough to let the moon catch his profile. No, he replied. I've learned to watch first. What did you see? He was silent. Then, a woman who doesn't need fire to burn a house down. He bowed and walked away. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. That night, I stood before my mirror once more. No second wife behind me. No shadow in my eyes. Just Yu Xiangjuan, daughter of no one, wife of ruin, mother of silence, and the keeper of her own name. They thought they had broken me, not with a blade, not with chains, but with silence. With a wedding veil I never chose. A second wife in my seat. A chamber without candles. A name they whispered only behind closed doors. But silence is not the absence of sound. It is pressure, waiting, and eventually, it echoes back louder than screams. It began with a document, one that Fian never meant for me to see. Buried beneath her old lacquered chest, among her love letters, fans, and silk handkerchiefs. A letter from her father, dated before the wedding. Once she is installed as second wife, the Yu girl will fade. The emperor's seal will pass to your name if you bear an heir first. Chiron is loyal to you.
Be sweet.
Be patient. Endure, and we shall have everything. Everything. Even my name. Even my lineage. Even the child I never had the chance to carry. I folded the letter in my sleeve, and did not speak of it for 17 days. Because vengeance is most effective when they think you've forgotten to care. Lord Chiron's court standing was weakening. Rumors of his household's disgrace had begun to reach the outer halls. Too many visitors had noticed Fian's absence. Too many noble wives whispered about poison and pity and power.
He tried to host dinners.
They declined. He sent gifts to the emperor's younger sons. They returned them unopened. He was becoming a name they no longer invited to speak. He came to my chamber one evening. Not drunk. Not angry. Just tired. Have you no comfort left for me? He asked. No peace. I poured him tea.
Hot.
Fragrant. Softly bitter. Peace was never mine to give, I said. Only survival. He looked down. I miss when things were simple. They were never simple, I said. You were just blind. The next day, I requested an audience at the Ministry of Records. It was a quiet visit. No guards. No fanfare. Just a scroll in my hand, sealed with my personal stamp and lined with Fian's father's handwriting. Inside, I tucked a second letter, this one written by me. I was wed dishonorably. Another wife installed on the same day, without imperial sanction. My name was used. My dowry halved. My title shared illegally. And when I endured, they called it obedience. I call it theft. I did not sign it as Lady Kai. I signed it as Yu Xiangjuan, because a stolen name can be rewritten, but a reclaimed one becomes immortal. The clerk bowed. He said nothing, but 3 days later, a summons arrived. The Empress requested my presence. This time, not for pleasantries. She wanted truth, and I gave it to her. Not in fury, not in tears, but in facts. The marriage was forced. The second wife illegal under imperial order. The household governed by deception. The title tarnished. The Kai family no longer worthy of trust. She listened. She did not interrupt. And when I finished, she asked only one question. And yet you smiled through it all.
Why?
I met her eyes. Because silence sharpens sharper than steel. And I wanted them to feel every cut without knowing where it bled from. That night, I received her blessing. My name was restored in the official records. Fian's was removed. My dowry was repaid, double. The land grants her family received were revoked. And Lord Chiron was summoned by the emperor. He left the house in silence and returned in shame. His position revoked. His father stripped of one rank. his face pale, his eyes no longer proud.
He avoided me now.
Like I was a ghost haunting the ruins of the man he once was. But I was not a ghost. I was fire, shaped like a woman, and I had only just begun to burn. Lord Chiron returned with red eyes and no words. He did not greet the servants.
He did not ask for wine.
He simply entered the hall, saw me seated at the main table, in the place where Fian once sat, and stopped. For a long time, as if memory had struck him across the face. "Xiangjuan," he said brokenly. "It wasn't meant to become this." I sipped my tea, but it did. They pushed me, her family, my mother. I thought I could balance it all. You never tried. I loved you in a way. No, I said, setting my cup down. You loved how easily I disappeared. He came closer, dropped to his knees before me. A lord of the Kai house, now bowing in the same room where I had once stood invisible. Let me fix this. Let me earn it back. You can't, I replied. I'll give you everything. You already did. He looked up confused. So I leaned forward, voice soft as ash. You gave me your silence, your arrogance, your shame, your name, and I turned all of it into a weapon. Now, I stood, slow and graceful. You may keep the ashes. I already built something better. The next day, I declined the emperor's offer to restore Lord Chiron's former court position. I sent word to the empress that the house would remain under my stewardship. And when the scroll was returned, stamped, sealed, and approved, the staff bowed when I passed. Not out of fear, out of knowledge. They now understood who had kept this house standing, and who had nearly burned it to the ground. That night, in the southern gardens, the plum trees bloomed again. The same ones Fian once claimed. The ones Lord Chiron once wandered like a guilty ghost. And under those blossoms stood the man in black again. The general, still watching, still silent. I approached him, without hesitation. What do you see this time? I asked.
He turned.
And this time, he bowed deeply. Not a woman scorned, he said. A woman crowned, without needing a crown. What do you want from me? Nothing, he said simply. But I will stand beside you if you ever wish to walk forward. He did not ask for my hand, did not reach for my arm. He simply waited. A man who understood power without trying to possess it. I left him there. But for the first time, I did not walk away alone. I walked ahead, knowing he would follow when I was ready. My name was once erased from the records. Now it was carved in crimson ink across scrolls, seals, and silken lips. They tried to break me quietly, so I made my silence loud enough to echo through the empire. And when I speak now, they listen. The cup had always been for others.
For guests.
For ancestors. For the man who married me beside another. For the woman who smiled in my place. For the silence I swallowed and sweetened with jasmine. But not this one. This time, the cup was mine. And I poured it with hands that no longer trembled. Spring had returned. Not in petals. Not in rain. But in how I breathed. For the first time in years. I did not wait to be summoned. I rose before the sun. Walked the southern halls barefoot. Let the silence be mine, not theirs. The household was quieter now. No one whispered. No one plotted. Because there was no longer a woman to erase. No second veil. No borrowed name. Only me. Yu Xiangjuan. The women of court continued to visit. Not with sympathy, but with scrolls. Ideas.
Partnership.
They wanted my guidance. My steadiness. My silence that now carried weight. Lady Yu, one said. We hear you are building something. Not building, I replied. Reclaiming. I opened a private hall in the western quarter. Not for guests. For women.
Wives.
Daughters. Widows. Those with broken dowries. Faded titles. Silences too long and too bitter to carry alone. We met with ink-stained fingers. With ledgers and laughter. We taught each other things our mothers were too afraid to say. You were not born to disappear. You are not a shadow of another woman's fortune. Your voice is not too loud. They simply made the room too small. We called it the House of Quiet Ashes, because from what they burned in us, we built walls that sang. Lord Chiron rarely spoke now. He passed me in the halls with lowered eyes. He stopped attending court altogether. He was a man reduced not by poison, but by the weight of his own choices. He tried once more to speak with me. Do you hate me still? I looked at him for a long time, and then said the one truth he never gave me.
No.
I no longer feel anything when I say your name. Fian never returned from the temple. Some say she regained her voice. Others say she wanders the cliffside gardens, searching for the woman who once braided her hair. I do not wish her harm, but I do not wish her back. Some ghosts are meant to stay buried. And the general? He did not ask again, but he came. Sometimes once a week, sometimes less. He never brought gifts. Only conversation. Only quiet. He asked about the women I mentored. He listened when I spoke of law and trade and legacy. And once, when I brought him tea, he looked at me fully and said, "You are not what they tried to make of you." "No," I said. "I became what they were afraid of." He nodded. And that was enough. I did not remarry.
Not yet.
But I no longer feared it, because if I gave my heart again, it would not be from silence. It would not be offered beside another woman's hand, or under another man's shadow. It would be poured like this tea.
Calm. Warm.
And only for me. The final cup I poured wasn't for revenge, wasn't for power, wasn't even for justice. It was for the girl I once was, quiet, erased, obedient. The one they buried beneath red silk and called wife. And when I drank from it, I felt nothing burn, only peace. Now, when they speak my name, they say it without pity, without scandal, without shame. Yu Xiangjuan, the woman who survived, the woman who ruled without a crown, the woman who burned nothing, but was the reason everything fell.